these numbers are extraordinary in terms of seat calculation. Could you just explain to people, because obviously most people won't know what an MRP poll is, which is a very sophisticated form of polling. In layman's terms, could you just lay out what it is?
Yeah, I mean, in layman's terms, it is essentially a large national poll that then uses a very sophisticated statistical regression that manages to
not a layman term there, Chris. Not a layman term.
Yeah, no, it is not. But yeah, it's right, essentially, it's able to distill that national share into seat by seat predictions, and I think that one of the big gaps, I guess, in the polling market, thinking about when I started my career, was that we were just really measuring vote share, and now we're trying to measure seat by seat predictions as well, and to give an overall sense, essentially, of some of the quirks in the UK electoral system. That is, if a party achieves X percentage of points nationally, how many seats will they end up with in the House of Commons? And yeah, I think the quirks of this election in particular does potentially point to a real Conservative wipeout.
And we should say that MRP polls in recent years have become better and better at predicting something quite akin or very close to the actual result. We've seen that play out on a number of occasions now. Most notably, I remember in 2017 in one case, which had been unexpected. But Chris, in terms of we talk often about the margin of error for this. I mean, how big is the margin of error for a poll like this? So, I mean, could it be substantially better or indeed worse even for the Conservatives than your poll would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can. And just to be clear, we haven't conducted the MRP poll. We've had a separate one out over the weekend with the Telegraph. That if you plug that into a seat predictor, it might even look worse. But yeah, the error margin can be quite large, particularly in individual constituencies, and therefore these must be treated with a little bit of caution. But I think Survation, who have conducted this MRP, have indeed published their margins, and it doesn't really matter which way you look at it on these numbers. Frankly, it does appear as though we're going to be looking at a very, very depleted Conservative Party if these numbers were to play out in 3 weeks' time.
It seems to me, Chris, that in terms of the polling, and let's just leaving the MRP aside, even just in terms of the sort of national headline polling, it seems to me that the main sort of stories of this election so far are these, aren't they? You've basically got the Conservatives failing to resurrect in any way. In fact, if anything, going backwards. Reforms rise, or reform eating into the Conservative share, which, since Farage has got back into the game, has ticked up a bit, although perhaps by not as much as he might like to indicate. And Labour's actual overall share in the sort of poll of polls actually falling a bit, but the gap is such between them and the Tories that it just doesn't matter. Would that be broadly correct?
Yeah, I think so. There's so much to say, and what contributes really to that over the last 4 years. I think, we are in a position, really, I think, pollsters and political commentators and journalists, where we just can't quite comprehend the scale of the defeat that could well be coming to the Conservative Party, because they're the natural party of government and they always turn it around in the end. But everything is conspiring against them, frankly, at this election, both mathematically and politically. Politically, in the sense of the last 4 years, we've had 3 prime ministers, all incredibly unpopular, and the Conservatives now have this perception among the public that no matter what they say, they cannot and do not deliver on it. And that's quite a powerful message when the electorate doesn't fear the alternative quite in the same way as they did in 2019. And then mathematically, the Labour and the Liberal Democrat vote is, we've seen this in the local elections recently, is incredibly efficient. They're really good at getting the Tories out, and then chuck Reform UK into the mix. And even if they get 10% in a given constituency, we believe that those Reform UK voters are coming directly from the Conservative share. This isn't UKIP in 2015 when they were coming from the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So that just makes it really, really difficult for the Conservatives to win seats now under the first past the post system.
Well, first past the post is their great friend, isn't it? Right up to the point that it's not. And suddenly
exactly.
they start to lose very heavily. I mean, you talk about the efficiency of the Labour vote distribution, Chris, and I suppose, again, to put that into even simpler terms, you're basically saying that their vote is exactly where it needs to be. It's spread out properly across the country, rather than it was in the Corbyn years, for example, of being piled up into the same places, which in our system is completely pointless. But it is true to say, as a result of that, isn't it? There is a world, and maybe we're not quite at that world yet, but you can sort of maybe start to divine it in the polls. There is a world where, such is the weirdness of first past the post as an electoral system. I mean, Starmer's Labour could end up getting a lower vote share than Corbyn, and actually get a majority of over 200, as we're saying, whereas Corbyn, of course, got 260 seats.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the point that you've just made. Jeremy Corbyn got a really good vote share in 2017, but he was able to stack up the Labour vote share in areas where they were already winning. I think what we've seen from Keir Starmer's Labour, and because of the swing away from the Conservative Party, is that they've been able to do better in areas where they lost in 2019 or were losing still in 2019. So yeah, and they're not really, the swing hasn't been as positive towards Labour in areas where they're already strong, and that ultimately is one of the reasons why things like the Gaza issue, which is a problem for the Labour Party, but is nowhere near as big of a problem for them as Reform UK are for the Conservatives. Frankly, all splits in terms of the left-right scale aren't created equal, and I think to any assumption that they are is just false, frankly.
Two final questions, Chris, briefly, if you could. One is with regards to reform. Farage is going around now saying that they think they could be as big a problem for Labour, if not in this election, then afterwards. Is there any polling evidence to give that any credibility? And then secondly, briefly, if you were the Prime Minister, if you were sat in number 10, you're looking at all the same data that you are, is there any path you can see to at least try and amass or try and cut down on that Labour lead?
I think what we're not clear on yet, I think, are the challenges that the Labour Party are going to face, and I think that Nigel Farage does appear as though he's going to be here to stay. We never know; he seems to change his mind about whether he wants to be in UK politics or not quite regularly. But if he is going to be around, I think he could definitely potentially be a real thorn in Labour and Keir Starmer's side, because the Conservative Party might go through some sort of existential crisis after this election, leaving a big gap for someone like Nigel Farage to provide, if not official opposition, plenty of opposition to the Labour Party. I think on the second point, I think the Conservative campaign really kicked off trying to go after those Reform UK voters, and Nigel Farage threw a massive spanner in those works. I think at this point, the Conservative campaign has to go after Labour voters. It has to keep talking about how you don't trust Labour with the economy. I think that's a little bit rich, given what the Conservatives have put the UK through in the last 4 years. And I think the public perception of the Conservatives' management of the economy is really bad. But that said, historically, it's been the Labour Party that aren't trusted there. I think we're going to hear a lot about Labour's tax rises and Labour's economic plans in the next couple of weeks to try and salvage something for this government in its last few days.